These long steel plates are very delicate. As you can see, it's very soft, and that's because they're virtually almost a scale thickness of the real beam, and that's why this kit has the delicacy that it has. And that may seem very fragile, but once this starts to get assembled with 3 sides in the styrene and then the lacing on the 4th side, that combination will stiffen this beam up considerably and give it some structural integrity. Now, I just continue. Now, it's very important to dress every edge. There's a little bit of flashing here and there, and it's just a way of ensuring that this finished product, this finished model, will be as clean and as perfect as possible. By no means is this a beginner's kit. This is truly a craftsman's kit. It takes a lot of time. Now, I've spent several hours cutting these apart, and I've used this blade here as a chopper to chop the sprues off on the thin portions, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, the number 11 on other parts of the separations of the various laser cut stringers. But every single part has to be dressed, and it takes some time. I mentioned this in earlier YouTube videos, that many of these models that I build take time, and it can get boring at times. This bridge in particular has a few components that are different, but many of each. So there's a lot of repetition throughout the construction of this model, and as a result it gets kind of boring. So I just generally sit here. Sometimes I'll have a show on in the background, but I'll just spend maybe an hour or two doing one thing at a time, and then leave it and come back and do another group. So I'll always do one complete component. Like in this case, cutting all these beams, and then I'll take a break, and then I'll come back and I'll dress all these and come back. So I always finish one complete set. Now here's an example here where there's some very fine flashing that still remains, that the sander probably won't take off, but I'll just lightly run a number 11 on my mat cutter, just to take that tiny sliver off, and then complete this. So going back to what I just said, don't rush this. It's amazing how fast it will go together when you just spend a few minutes, an hour here, an hour there. You don't have to sit at it for 8 hours a day. You can if you want, but it gets kind of boring, especially with the amount of repetition that there is here. And I'll show you all these repetitions, the components, in a few minutes. Now, once I've done that, then I'll take the number 11 blade again, and these beams, they're all cast with a hole at the ends and one in the center that will have the pin connections. And on the back side, there's a little bit of flashing in some cases, but what I'll do is I'll just take the number 11 and I'll just scallop out the end. I'll take the center one and I'll just rotate the blade to ease that hole, and the same at the end. And I'll just go through every one the same way, always from the back side, because the back side will have a little bit more plastic on the bottom edge, because when these are cast, that's actually probably got a little bit of a taper to it, so it's wider on the face than it is on the back side. That's how the casting can be removed. So again, just rotate the number 11 blade, just gently eases and opens that up. You see a bit of flashing in there, so it's not truly open, and nice and open, and just continue with it on every one. Now, you may not be building this bridge, and that's okay. The point of this, and of some of my other videos, is really to give you an idea and an example of some of the tools that I use, that I'm comfortable with, and some of the techniques that I use. And these can be applied to just about any model at any time, you know, as the case arises. And it just makes for better preparation, because the preparation of every model is far more important than the finished product, because the finished product is only as good as the preparation. So if you're not preparing the material properly, then anything else you do after that is only surface, only has a surface visibility, and it's only as good as that application at the end. So if you're painting, if you didn't put grain on, for example, on the wood, it's not going to show through. And if you leave burrs and flashing on styrene pieces, you don't clean them off, you paint them, that's only going to enhance that imperfection that much more. So preparation is very important, and it can be very tedious, very time consuming. But if you're going to build a model, and the model is worth building, do it right. Do it right from the beginning. Take your time. And now I just want to mention here, these are really truly amazing castings. This actually will have a plate on the back edge here. I'll just use this other one as an example. That'll probably come across the top here like so. And that plate is riveted to this. Well, on the back side, on this flange here, all the way down here, are rivets. They're all rivet heads, so that it's all going to line up. And even when we put on this lacing in here on the beam, all these rivets here on the edge will line up with the rivets on the inside of that flange. So everything is coordinated, and that's how authentic and realistic this model will become. There's a place for everything in every connection point. It truly is one of the most amazing, one of the best kits that I've ever seen or tried to assemble. Now it's important that this edge and the top be square. The casting is pretty accurate, and double check looks pretty good, but we want to take that burr off as well. And so what I've done is take the blade, and I've just made sure that's as flush as I could on the end. And now what we want to do is just sand that burr off. So there is a sanding tool for this, but I like to use something that's a little easy to handle. I put my square against a pad like this, in this case the cutting pad, and then I press that against my square, and the sanding block, which is the aluminum with a piece of sandpaper, against that, and then holding it, and then just a few swipes. Never pull back, because if you pull back you'll pull this way. So it's always in a forward motion against the block. Keep the square, hands on the square, thumb pushing it very gently against the sanding pad. A few gentle swipes, and you can see the gray end here all the way across, which means it has completely been sanded. Then I'll just take the blade and I just wipe it across the corners. Takes that little fuzz off the corners, and across the end here, just a swipe. You get a nice clean corner, and just a double check. Perfect. Again, this black, looking at it through the edge here against the white paper, and it's a nice square cut, because what's important is when the legs, I'll just use a piece of scrap here, when that side leg goes on there, it's got to be absolutely perpendicular. So that's when that's bonded, it's very important that that be square. That's simple. After doing all this sanding, all the parts will have very fine styrene dust on them. So what I'll do is take, and I'll just run some water over them, move them around a little bit, just to flush off all that water, all the dust I should say, with the water, and then just lay them on some paper towels to dry. And then what I'll do is I'll just take some paper towels individually and then just wipe each one down to make, get rid of as much water as possible. So they do need to be rinsed off to get rid of all that dust. Otherwise that dust stays on there when you go to paint it, and you'll get a bit of a textured paint finish, which isn't really what you want. The next step here is to separate the steel plates on this piece of etched brass. And this has all been double etched, as I mentioned earlier. So what happens is the rivets are actually raised, and on the back side there's a shoulder, so that when the channels are glued to them, there's a shoulder for them to fit exactly in place and in alignment. And what I don't want to do is separate too many parts ahead of time, because then I'm going to end up with a lot of parts that are going to be very easily misplaced. So I'm using this chisel blade to separate these little tabs that are holding everything in place. I don't want to use flush cutters or anything at this stage, because there's a little twist and it'll damage the face of the girder. And so what I'll do is I'll just run this as a chopper, and you can hear it snap as it cuts through, because the brass is very thin and it's very easily separated because it is so thin. So all I'm doing is removing the pieces that are actually going to be involved in creating the vertical beams. Like so. And it's a couple that haven't been separated, so I just retab them, and then that'll just come right out.